75 meters. That is the distance between a military explosion and an operational nuclear reactor. Not 75 miles, not 75 kilometers, 75 meters. The length of a competitive swimming pool, the width of a soccer penalty area, a distance a person can walk in under a minute. On the night of April 4, 2026, that is how close this war came to becoming something that cannot be undone. Underground ammunition depots beneath Iran's largest naval base in the Persian Gulf began detonating in sequence, one explosion triggering the next, secondary blasts rippling through mountain tunnels reinforced with layers of concrete and steel for hours, the smoke rising high enough to be visible from satellites in orbit, and sitting 75 meters away from all of it, an operational nuclear reactor containing thousands of kilograms of nuclear material, powering a city of 250,000 people. No radiation leak has been detected, not yet, but the IAEA Director General has expressed what he called deep concern. Russia, Iran's own strategic partner, publicly condemned what happened. Iran's foreign minister went before the international community and used the words war crime. And Rosatom, the Russian state nuclear corporation that helped build the Bushehr plant, began evacuating its personnel in buses, 198 people in a single wave. This is States news. What happened at Bushehr on April 4th is not just a military story, it is a geopolitical earthquake. It has cracked the foundational doctrine that Iran built its entire defense strategy around for decades. It has changed the Hormuz calculation for every country on Earth that depends on oil. And it has put the world in a conversation about nuclear safety that no one wanted to be having. We are going to walk you through every dimension of this. What was struck, what was lost, what the 75-M number actually means, and where this is heading. Stay with us. Before you can understand why the April 4th strike matters so profoundly, you need to understand what Bushehr actually is. Because this is not just a naval base. It is the centerpiece of Iran's entire strategic posture in the Persian Gulf. Bushehr Naval Base sits on the southwestern coast of Iran, directly facing the Persian Gulf. It is the primary operational hub for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGC-N, and it serves as the main staging ground for Iran's fast attack boat fleet, the swarms of small, agile vessels that form the front line of Iran's ability to threaten shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. But what most people do not know, what Iran has spent years trying to keep the world from fully appreciating, is what lies beneath the surface at Bushehr. Because the base is not just what you can see from satellite imagery. Beneath it is a massive tunnel complex carved directly into the mountain, reinforced with multiple layers of concrete and steel, multiple entry and exit points, emergency evacuation systems, automated ammunition transport rails, temperature and humidity controls for long-term weapon storage. This is not a warehouse. This is a feat of underground military engineering that Iran built specifically to be impervious to conventional aerial bombardment. Inside those tunnels, missile stockpiles, attack drones, drone assembly lines, and the rapid rearmament systems that form the logistical backbone of Iran's ability to wage asymmetric warfare across the Persian Gulf. Iran's state television had been broadcasting footage of this kind of infrastructure for years. Missiles moving smoothly along automated underground rails, rows of drones bathed in the fluorescent glow of tunnel corridors. The message delivered to the world was deliberate and clear. Come and strike us. Go ahead. We will survive underground. You cannot reach us down here. And then there is the other thing that sits at Bushehr, the thing that makes everything about this story different from any other strike in this conflict. The nuclear power plant. The Bushehr nuclear power plant, Iran's only operational commercial reactor, sits directly adjacent to the military complex, built with Russian technical assistance, jointly operated by Iranian and Russian personnel, connected to the civilian power grid supplying 250,000 people. Russia's state nuclear corporation, Rosatom, was so deeply integrated into this facility that it had hundreds of employees living on site with their families. This is the place where underground ammunition depots detonated in sequence for hours on April 4th. Here is what happened based on open-source satellite imagery and military assessments reviewed following the strike. The attack targeted both surface infrastructure and underground facilities simultaneously. Craters appeared at the naval base's piers, ships were damaged, hangars, administrative buildings, and ammunition depots on the surface were struck. United States Central Command subsequently confirmed that the Shahid Mahalati Naval Boatyard in Bushehr, the facility responsible for manufacturing and repairing Iran's fast attack craft, had been severely damaged. CENTCOM's statement was precise and unambiguous. The facility, represented in their words, a significant portion of Iran's small boat production and maintenance capacity. Read that carefully. Not a setback, not a dent, a significant portion. Gone. But what happened underground is where the story becomes truly extraordinary. The secondary explosions that continued for hours after the initial strike tell a very specific story. Precision munitions struck underground entrances and ventilation systems. The resulting pressure and heat triggered a chain reaction detonating ammunition stored within the depot complex. The explosions worked inward through the tunnel system, one stored weapon igniting the next, the mountain itself amplifying and channeling the force of successive detonations. The footage that emerged, combined with satellite assessments and open-source intelligence analysis, revealed craters and partial collapses at multiple points. Iranian media claim the damage was limited. Independent satellite assessments and the open-source intelligence community told a sharply different story, and technical analysts reached a conclusion that has significant implications well beyond Bushehr itself. Repairing tunnel infrastructure of this scale, mountain engineering at this level of complexity, under international sanctions, without access to specialized equipment and materials, is not a project measured in months. It is measured in years. Iran built those tunnels as an impenetrable shield. On April 4th, that shield cracked. But here is the question that the entire Iranian military establishment is now being forced to confront. If the Bushehr tunnels were breached to this extent, what does that mean for every other underground facility Iran has built? Natanz, Fordo, scattered missile depots across the country. All of them products of the same foundational doctrine, all of them built on the same premise, that deep enough underground, reinforced with enough concrete and steel, means untouchable. Bushehr was the ultimate real-world test of that claim, and based on what the satellite imagery and technical assessments are showing, the penetration munitions used in the April 4th strike demonstrated capability against hardened underground infrastructure that Iran designed specifically to withstand conventional bombardment. We cannot say with certainty that what happened at Bushehr applies identically to every other underground facility. The depth of the rock varies. The composition of the mountain varies. The reinforcement levels vary at each site. But what cannot be denied is that the fundamental assumption underlying the entire doctrine, that going underground means going untouchable, has been placed under serious, credible question for the first time. Tehran may now need to reassess not just a single naval base, but the foundational logic of its entire defense architecture. The doctrine of underground invincibility was not just a tactical choice. It was the philosophical bedrock of Iran's military planning for decades. And on April 4th, the secondary explosions rippling through those mountain tunnels may have been the sound of that bedrock cracking. Now, let us talk about the Strait of Hormuz, because Bushehr and Hormuz are inseparable. You cannot understand why the April 4th strike matters globally without understanding what the base was built to control. 20% of the world's oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. Every LNG carrier, every oil tanker moving from the Persian Gulf to global markets has to squeeze through that narrow choke point. For decades, Iran's ability to threaten that strait was its ultimate strategic trump card, the power to say to any adversary, "Push us too far, and we will close the tap on 20% of global oil." The fast attack boats that Bushehr built, maintained, and launched, the coastal defense missiles stockpiled in those underground tunnels, the mine-laying operations coordinated from the base, the attack drones assembled in those underground halls. Bushehr was not just one element of Iran's Hormuz threat. It was the coordination hub, the logistical backbone, the engine driving the entire Hormuz deterrent. That engine has been severely damaged. Following the April 4th strike, military analysts observed a noticeable decline in Iranian naval patrol activity in the Persian Gulf. This does not mean Iran's Hormuz card has been entirely eliminated. Iran retains missile capabilities. It has presence at other bases along the coast. Its proxy forces still maintain operational reach across the region, but the largest, most organized, most capable infrastructure supporting the rapid deployment of that threat has taken a blow that will not be repaired quickly. Iran's ability to play the Hormuz card as credibly and as rapidly as before April 4th has been fundamentally compromised. And this shift matters far beyond military circles. Oil markets price Hormuz risk. Marine insurance premiums reflect Hormuz risk. Tanker route decisions are made based on Hormuz risk. Regional investment strategies from Riyadh to Singapore incorporate Hormuz risk. The Bushehr strike directly rewrites the equation that all of those calculations have been running on. The global economy has been recalibrating to a post-Bushehr Hormuz since the secondary explosion stopped echoing through those tunnels. Now, the reactor. This is the part of the story that has alarmed the entire world, and it deserves to be told with the precise numbers and the precise statements that make clear exactly how serious the situation is. The Bushehr nuclear power plant was struck 4 times in the week surrounding the April 4th attack. 4 times. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed this publicly, stating the facility had been bombed 4 times since the broader war erupted, and criticizing what he described as a profound lack of international concern for nuclear safety. On the night of April 4th specifically, the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed that a projectile struck close to the plant's premises. One member of the site's physical protection staff was killed. A building sustained damage from shock waves and fragments, and the closest impact point that night was 75 meters from the reactor itself. 75 meters. The IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi issued an official statement expressing what he called deep concern. He stated explicitly that nuclear sites in the areas nearby must never be attacked. He warned that auxiliary buildings on nuclear sites may house vital safety equipment, that striking structures adjacent to a reactor is not a surgical operation with clean boundaries. He reiterated his call for maximum military restraint near nuclear facilities. The good news, and right now it is holding, is that no radiation leak has been detected. The IAEA has confirmed no increase in radiation levels following the April 4th strike. Continuous monitoring is ongoing, but here is what cannot be repeated enough. Rosatom, the Russian state nuclear corporation that built the Bushehr plant and continues to cooperate it, began evacuating its personnel after the strike. Rosatom's director announced buses departing the Bushehr station, 198 people in the largest single evacuation wave. And Rosatom issued a public statement that deserves to be read word for word. They said, "We categorically condemn what happened and call on the parties to the conflict to make every possible effort to de-escalate the situation." Russia, Iran's strategic partner, the country that helped design and build the Bushehr reactor, publicly condemning military activity around it and calling for de-escalation. That is not a routine diplomatic statement. That is Russia sending a signal about how alarmed it is by how close this war has come to a nuclear safety catastrophe. Iran's foreign minister drew a comparison that has gone largely unremarked in Western media, but is generating significant attention in diplomatic circles. He pointed to the sustained international outrage over Russian military activity near Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant during the Russia-Ukraine war, the repeated UN Security Council meetings, the IAEA emergency declarations, the European statements of alarm, and he asked a pointed question. Why is that same level of outrage not being directed at what is happening at Bushehr? The European Union, which was vocal about Zaporizhzhia, has been largely silent about Bushehr. That asymmetry is being noticed. It is generating a legitimate and uncomfortable debate about whether international standards of nuclear safety are being applied consistently, or whether they are applied selectively, based on which party is perceived as the aggressor in a given conflict. The IAEA has already confirmed that Iran's heavy water production plant at Khandab sustained severe damage in a late March strike and is no longer operational. The enrichment center at Fordow is being monitored. Conversion facility at Isfahan is under observation. The entire constellation of Iran's declared nuclear infrastructure is now operating under the shadow of an active war. This is a situation with no modern precedent. The closest analogy is Zaporizhzhia, and that situation alarmed the world for 2 years without a single detonation occurring within the plant's boundaries. At Bushehr on April 4th, an explosion occurred 75 meters from an operational reactor. The fact that no radiation leak occurred is not a reason for relief. It is a reason for sober recognition of how narrow the margin was, and it is a reason to take with full seriousness the IAEA's warnings about the unpredictability of what could happen if military strikes continue at or near nuclear facilities. Iran's foreign minister formally asked the IAEA to condemn the attacks on Bushehr. The head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization wrote to Director General Grossi, stating that the attacks constitute a clear violation of international law and an instance of a war crime. Whatever one's view of Iran's conduct in this conflict, the argument that striking within 75 meters of an operational nuclear reactor raises profound questions of international law is one that even Iran's critics are struggling to entirely dismiss. Let us now look at what the Bushehr strike did to Iran's proxy network, because this dimension of the story has received almost no coverage, and it matters enormously. Bushehr was not purely a conventional military installation. The underground storage facilities beneath the base were part of the logistical infrastructure feeding Iran's regional allies. Weapons supply chains to the Houthis in Yemen, to Hezbollah in Lebanon, to Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. Components of those chains, missiles, drones, ammunition, guidance systems, pass through underground storage facilities like those beneath Bushehr. The destruction of those stockpiles has likely impacted not only Iran's own direct retaliatory capabilities, but its ability to transfer weapons and ammunition to its proxies at previous rates. Consider the contrast in Iran's behavior before and after April 4th. Following the initial February 28th strikes that began this conflict, Iran launched hundreds of drones and ballistic missiles at United States bases and regional infrastructure across the Gulf. That campaign targeted CENTCOM headquarters in Bahrain, Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, Camp Buehring in Kuwait, Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, and others. Within the first 2 weeks of the war, damage to U.S. regional bases reached approximately $800 million. Iran's retaliatory actions following the April 4th Bushehr strike were notably, measurably more limited. That contrast is being closely studied by military analysts. The leading hypothesis is straightforward. The degradation of the underground storage infrastructure at Bushehr reduced the stockpiles available for rapid retaliation. Iran hit back less hard because it had less available to hit back with. The Houthi leadership in Yemen issued statements of solidarity following the Bushehr strike, but changes in their operational activity in the Red Sea are being watched carefully by maritime security analysts in the weeks that follow. Against this backdrop, a ceasefire has been developing, and the shape of that ceasefire tells you everything about the strategic position Iran now occupies. Iran has accepted a 2-week ceasefire. Talks are set to begin in Islamabad. The United States suspended its strikes conditioned on Iran fully reopening the Strait of Hormuz to safe passage. Iran's Foreign Minister Arakchi confirmed that safe passage through the waterway would be ensured for 2 weeks through coordination with Iran's armed forces. But here is the revealing detail in Iran's negotiating posture. When the United States proposed a 45-day ceasefire, Iran rejected it. Iran said it would only negotiate a permanent end to the war with guarantees that it would not be attacked again. Read that carefully. Iran is not asking for a pause to rebuild and regroup. Iran is asking for permanent security guarantees before it commits to anything longer than 2 weeks. That is not the negotiating position of a country that believes time is on its side. That is the negotiating position of a country that has assessed its own damage, looked at the state of its underground doctrine, and concluded that the longer this war continues, the worse its strategic position becomes. History tells us that when a country's deterrence has been fundamentally shaken, 2 paths open. The first is escalation, riskier, more unpredictable moves to compensate for lost capability. Surprise attacks via proxies, cyber operations targeting critical infrastructure, asymmetric moves that bypass conventional military logic entirely. The second path is the negotiating table, accepting military realities and seeking a diplomatic exit while some leverage remains. Iran's willingness to talk in Islamabad, its decision to reopen the strait, its framing of the nuclear safety issue as an international concern, all of these suggest the second path is being taken, at least for now. But the situation is deeply, precariously unstable. Israel has made clear that Lebanon is not covered by the U.S.-Iran ceasefire and has continued operations there. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq continue launching drone attacks on United States bases. The Houthi leadership is still projecting power in the Red Sea. The ceasefire is fragile, conditional, and surrounded by active fire on multiple fronts. So, let us be precise about what has actually changed since April 4th, because clarity matters here. The Hormuz card has not been eliminated, but it has been severely diminished. The largest, most organized, most capable infrastructure supporting that threat has been struck. Iran's ability to rapidly deploy the organized high-volume Hormuz threat that Bushehr enabled has been compromised in ways that will take years to repair. The underground doctrine has been cracked. The belief that what is buried deep enough is safe from conventional weapons has been placed under serious question by demonstrated capability. That forces Iran to reassess every facility built under that assumption, which means most of its strategic military architecture. The proxy supply chain has been degraded. The underground stockpile destruction at Bushehr has likely reduced Iran's ability to arm and resupply its regional networks at previous rates. The operational tempo of those networks in the coming weeks will tell much of the story, and the nuclear safety issue has been elevated to the top of the international agenda in a way that gives Iran a form of leverage it did not choose, but now possesses. The ability to frame continued military escalation as a threat not just to Iran, but to the entire Gulf and to the global nuclear non-proliferation order. Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE all lie within the potential fallout zone of a reactor incident. Their governments know this. Diplomatic channels have been activated. The IAEA is watching. The UN Security Council is watching. Russia is watching with particular alarm. And there is one more dimension that cannot be overlooked: time. Before April 2026, Iran could reasonably believe it had the capacity and the time to rebuild its military presence in the Gulf. Sanctions slow things down, but time and engineering can overcome a great deal. That luxury now appears to have been removed. The underground tunnel complex at Bushehr would take years to rebuild under optimal conditions. Under current sanction levels, without access to mountain engineering equipment and specialized materials, the timeline extends further. The window for Iran to restore its pre-war naval posture in the Gulf is measured in years, not months. The Islamabad talks are beginning. The ceasefire is fragile. The 75-meter number is still echoing through every diplomatic conversation about how this war ends. Will Iran choose escalation or diplomacy? The early signals point toward negotiation, but Iran has entered those talks from a position of damaged deterrence rather than confident strength. How Tehran navigates the gap between its remaining leverage and its diminished capability will determine whether the Gulf sees de-escalation or a next wave of confrontation. What is certain is this: a doctrine that Iran built over decades, the doctrine of underground invincibility, the doctrine that burying your military assets deep enough makes you untouchable, has been placed under the most serious question it has ever faced. Bushehr was the ultimate test of that doctrine, the most visible, most dramatic, most consequential test. And on April 4, 2026, the secondary explosions that echoed for hours through those mountain tunnels, combined with the knowledge that a nuclear reactor sat 75 meters away from the closest impact point, may have marked the moment when an entire strategic era began its end. The ceasefire is holding for now. The reactor is intact for now. The talks in Islamabad are beginning, but this story is not over, not even close. This is States News. If today's analysis gave you a clearer picture of one of the most complex and dangerous moments of our time, make sure you subscribe. We will be here, covering every development as the Islamabad talks unfold, and as the IAEA continues monitoring Bushehr and Iran's other nuclear sites. The next chapter of this story is already being written.